Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I'm excited about this topic because it seems like I get asked questions about water leaks regularly, monthly, many times a month, all throughout the year, and it still is confusing every single time. It's a confusing topic, so I'm glad we're actually having a class on it so I could try to make this easier for you. But first, before we get started, a little housekeeping. I am Melissa Garcia, and I'm one of the shareholders over here at Altitude Community Law. Right now, you should see the PowerPoint presentation taking up most of your screen. There should also be a small box on the left-hand side of the screen with the presenter, me. On the right side of the menu, you should see a private chat icon. Please use this icon to type in your questions throughout the presentation. Questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar, time permitting. I'll try to get as many questions as I can, and if I can't get them all in, then hopefully we'll be able to print out the chat or something so I can respond to the rest afterwards. If you have audio or video issues during the presentation, please click the No Audio or Video button below the presentation on your screen and follow the instructions. One CMCA credit will be automatically generated and emailed to you after the webinar, assuming you attended the entire program, no sneaking out. These credits are not transferable. Please email Jessa Ledesma at JLEDESMA@altitude.law. I'm going to say that again, JLEDESMA@altitude.law, or call 303-991-2086 if you have any questions about the webinar or receiving your CMCA certificate. Lastly, there will be a survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. Please let us know what you think of it. Your thoughts and opinions are important to us. So I'll just say right now, if you love the webinar, again, my name is Melissa Garcia. If you hated the webinar, my name is David Furman. All right, let's get started. Anatomy of a water leak. Oh, one last housekeeping. Next webinar is for board members, and this is a great time to train new board members, particularly for onboarding and everything. And the class is Board Member Basics. And it's, again, perfect for onboarding new boards, and it's still the beginning of the year. That class is February 22nd, 5:30 to 7 p.m. And then, of course, there's the lovely Corporate Transparency Act, the CTA that you've been hearing about. We have a webinar for that. And that's going to be on February 29th from noon to 1. So be sure to plug in for those. Okay, let's get started. It's just one topic, but there's a lot to say about this topic. So I want to get right into it and try to answer as many questions as you have. So anatomy of a water leak. What are we discussing? This question right here. If our pipes burst this winter, who is responsible? Or this whatever, who's responsible? It seems like it's going to be an easy question, and there's a lot of assumptions that come in, but it's not an easy question. It's probably one of the most difficult questions that board members and managers have to face in their governance of associations and operating the community, particularly with condos and townhomes, because you have these shared walls, shared common elements. More than one unit is usually affected by it, so that it usually affects condos and townhomes and any kind of shared row homes or paired homes. But it can sometimes also affect single family homes that are detached, because there could be the situation, for example, if water is coming from outside, maybe it's coming from drainage or common elements and it's going to the basement, or maybe it's just a flood and it's going into the basement of a unit. And even though you have no responsibility typically for the inside of that basement, there's still questions. Well, it's coming from the outside, from your Common Elements Association. So it could also affect single-family home communities. So what we want to do, 3 questions to ask in every single water intrusion analysis. And again, I'm trying to make this as simple as possible, even though it will not be a simple process. I'm trying to create structure so that you approach it correctly and you can kind of okay, I can figure it out based on these questions. And then if you still can't figure it out, or you need assistance, you can always contact your attorney, and we can kind of walk you through it and everything. But this is supposed to give you a general way of approaching all water intrusion questions and claims. So you're going to ask 3 questions, and they're all important for different reasons, but you have to ask all of them before you get to that final answer. And things like, different facts, different governing documents, different Kiowa, other things could serve to change the end result. So you have to be careful as you're going through this analysis. So what are the questions? Number 1, what exactly was damaged? Exactly. Number 2, who has the underlying maintenance repair obligation for the damaged components? Not just for the damaged components, but also the component that failed. And then finally, number 3, does either negligence or insurance serve to shift that responsibility for repair costs to another party? So we're going to go through each of these questions and talk about why it's important to analyze them thoroughly. Okay. All right, let's start with the first one. What exactly was damaged? So what exactly was damaged? Is it the carpet? Is it slab flooring? Is it drywall? Somebody's personal property, the basement, whatever it was, you need to find out not just the area, not just, oh, it's in the unit, but you need to find out the specifics of the actual damage. And it's important for a number of reasons. But what you're trying to do is communicate and find out right away from the owner. If the owner approaches you first and tells you about the water leak that's coming in through their unit, you need to find out this information. It's important for a couple of reasons. One, why do we care? One, determining and prioritizing scope of repairs. I mean, is it a flood that's going to continue to damage all the other units and common elements? And so if you don't get on it right away, you're gonna have more problems, more damage, and potentially more liability if you don't act on it quickly. So both determining and prioritizing scope of repairs. Then number 2, mitigating any further damage. Because again, if you don't get on it right away, particularly if it's one of those floods, then it would cause more damage. So you want to be able to address it right away, mitigating any further damage. And then finally, number 3, evaluating whether to file an insurance claim. And that's really important to know what has been damaged, as well as the cost of repairs, because this is going to affect whether or not you have any kind of responsibility as an association to file a claim on your association's policy. So that's something that you want to know right away. You want to figure it out. And it's important to know this, that you have also immediate communication. So we're going to talk later about best practices, such as how to make this process easier. And one of the things we're going to recommend is a water leak policy, because a water leak policy essentially provides step-by-step instructions. If you owner see a watermark on the ceiling, this is what you do. If water is leaking through your bathroom or whatever, this is what you do. Here's the steps. Here's who you call. Here's who you notify. Here's what we're going to do as an association. So if you don't have that water leak policy already, it's important to get into a communication groove with the owner so that you know what's happening. I mean, is the owner going to call their own vendor? Are they going to file their own claim? Are they contacting their contractors right away? And are they going to have their insurance out there to give you, the list of repairs? Whatever it is that whoever gets damaged, if you know it's just one unit or if there's a couple units, try to get into communication with the owner immediately, both of the unit where it might have started as well as the unit where it's being damaged, so you can try to start getting this information quickly and evaluating quickly. So one of the things that I sometimes get asked is, well, if it's a unit-to-unit issue, should we even get involved? I'm not responsible as an association for the unit. The other unit owner is responsible for whatever happened in their unit. So there's a pipe that broke and it's their unit and it's traveling to the other unit, and I shouldn't get involved. It's a unit to new unit issue. So that's something that if we're discussing a single family home, yeah, that's probably correct, because there's a detached, there's no responsibility for the interior. They're detached. There's no interior insurance responsibility from the association or maintenance and repair responsibility. But even if it's unit to unit and you think that it's just damaging the unit below and it's coming from the other unit, remember, in a condo, there's common elements, and there's common elements, so probably the water is traveling through those common elements. So by nature of it traveling through, there's probably some damage through that common elements or some potential responsibility to fix whatever's going on. So I would, if definitely with a condo association, don't assume that you're not supposed to be involved. You still have to figure out what exactly was damaged to determine your responsibility and whether you can, exit from it right away. So get involved. Shouldn't we first find out where the water came from? Well, sure. You definitely want to determine where the water came from, and we'll talk a little bit about how you investigate for that. But you want to know that because you want to make sure that component, whatever failed, is fixed, so it doesn't continue to leak and continue to cause a problem. So absolutely, you want to know where it came from, but the answer to that question is not critical to determining who's responsible for the damaged components. So that answer, where it's coming from, is not critical at this point to who's responsible for the repairs. And that brings me to my first myth. We're going to tackle a couple of myths, and these are myths because these are things that I get asked these questions and it comes up regularly. So I think, oh, everybody believes this. So myth number one, the source of the water always dictates the party responsible for the repair. So that is false. So it seems natural to assume that just because it's coming from the common element roof, then all the damage from that water coming from that common element hole in the roof is the association's responsibility. Or because it's coming from a water heater pipe or line inside the unit, and that's what failed, then all the damage caused by that water line is the owner's responsibility. So that's just not the case. And it's just not the case because the overwhelming number of declarations out there do not assign repair responsibility based on the source of the damage. They don't say, if this carpet was damaged, then the person upstairs where the water came through and damaged the carpet is responsible for that damage. They rarely say that. A few do, and we'll talk a little bit about what happens if they do say that, but they rarely say that. If you look at your declaration, your CC&Rs, you're going to see, hopefully, a section that's just maintenance and repair responsibilities. And all it says is who is responsible for making these repairs. It rarely says you are responsible for making these repairs unless blah, blah, blah. It comes from water from the common elements. So I just don't want you to get stuck on that question and start assigning responsibility based on source of the water, because that's going to be relevant later on down on the third question, but it's not relevant in the beginning. It's only relevant so you can stop the leak from continuing. Okay, next question. Who has the underlying maintenance and repair obligation? So we've already we now know, hopefully, or we're in the process of getting a scope of repairs from the owner, or we've contacted our vendors to find out what kind of damage is done to the common elements, if any, and we're in that process. So as we're gathering this information, you continue to keep this on the front burner, because a lot of this information you need to act quickly, and you need to be responsive, because the more you wait and the more you defer some of this stuff, it might get worse in the end, and your liability might grow in the end. So as we're getting this process, the next question is going to be, who has the underlying maintenance and repair obligation? So where do you find that? Or what questions do you need to ask, I guess? Number one, review who maintains the component that failed. So it could be a couple of components that failed. It could be just, we find out there's a hole in the roof of the condo building or whatever, but you're in this investigative process and let's say you find out, oh, it's coming from this pipe. And that could be your contractor or that could be the owner's contractor. And again, we'll talk a little bit about the water leak policy down the road so we can try to control the situation. But somebody's telling you it's coming from X. Now, I wouldn't necessarily assume that this, if it's just from a homeowner, for example, saying, not to say anything bad about homeowners, we're all homeowners, but if they just say, oh, there's a hole in the roof, it's coming from there. And let's say they're in the top condo of a 3-stack condo, and they say, oh, there's a hole in the roof. And all of a sudden we see all this water leaking down to the lower condo units. And if you just say, okay, we'll go fix the roof, and then don't do any due diligence, you don't have a report from that homeowner's contractor saying it's coming, this particular leak is coming from the roof, or you don't have a report from your contractor saying it's coming from the roof, and all you have is a verbal statement from the owner, this could again cause problems down the line because you're really not making an informed decision. And if you're not making an informed decision as a board member, and I know you're managers and you need to advise your boards, but if you're not making an informed decision, that statement might be incorrect. So this actually happened with one of our associations where it was a stacked condo, and the person on the top condo said it's from the roof, and then they realized there's a hole in the roof, so they patched the roof and they didn't really do anything more. And what happened was it was actually a leak in the top condo unit owner's water line. And so when they fixed the roof, for whatever reason, the leak also stopped, but it didn't really. It was still leaking a little bit, but nobody could see any kind of clear damage, but it was continuing to leak and continuing to leak. And then we found out later that the leak was actually from that water line. But here's a situation where the association or the board of directors failed to ask questions, failed to conduct an investigation, and that led to the claim of, well, hey, if you would have investigated initially, we would have found out that it's coming from this and not from the roof. There wouldn't be all this mold that's now grown because you haven't, looked at that, investigated it first. And there wouldn't be these additional damages. And this weight is caused by you, board, because you failed to make an informed decision. So just make sure that you review who maintains the component that failed and figure out, who is responsible for repairing that particular component. And then also review who maintains the components that were damaged. So that's a big key again, what was damaged, in order to determine the scope and prioritize the repairs, determine ultimate responsibility for fixing them, and also determine whether to file an insurance claim. So how do you do this? Well, before we get to that, I'm going to go to myth number 2. So myth number 2 comes from, again, condo associations. I get this question or this statement all the time where a manager will call me and say, well, we have this water leak. It's been, freezing temperatures. We have this water leak, and we determined through their contractor that's coming from a pipe that exclusively serves this unit. And so because it exclusively serves this unit, then this unit owner is responsible for the repair. And that's just, well, I'm not going to say that's not true because it could be true. It might be true, but you can't make those kinds of assumptions. Just because it comes from a pipe that exclusively serves a unit doesn't mean the unit owner is responsible. And for many reasons, which we'll talk about the first one, which is that the documents probably don't say that it's the unit owner's responsibility. They might not say that. So how do you figure out who has the underlying maintenance repair responsibility? First, look at the declaration. So that is the first place you want to look all the time. If you have a maintenance and insurance chart, which we'll talk about, that's the first place you need to look, because hopefully that chart was created correctly to figure this out for you, so you don't have to be, surfing through the docs or your online document and trying to find the maintenance and repair responsibility sections. Unfortunately, they're not always in a nice, neat box, and they're sometimes not very clear, particularly the older documents, but that's what you want to do. Look for the maintenance/repair section. And, if you're talking again about a condo community, townhomes a little bit different. Townhomes, often the association just has to maintain and repair the exterior. So it's generally the owner repairs the interior and the association repairs the exterior. That's the typical townhome community. I'm not saying all of them are like this, but that's what it usually says. But in a condo community, again, this class is the most important for condo communities. Most often, the declaration in the maintenance section will say something like, the association maintains the common elements and the owner maintains the unit. And then that sounds really easy. I wish it was easy, but often it is not easy. So you just have to be careful not to make assumptions of what is considered common element and what is considered the unit. So for example, if the declaration defines common elements, and this is a typical declaration, but if it defines common elements as everything in the entire project other than the unit, then where exactly does the unit start and the common elements end? That's usually what the question is. If there's a clear section saying, here are the unit boundaries, great. But oftentimes there's not. And it just says something like, the unit boundaries are the perimeter, walls, floors, and ceilings of the unit. Let's say it says that. So where exactly does the wall start? Does the wall start at the studs? Does the wall start at the drywall? Does the wall start at the paint, at the texture? So if that's not defined in your declaration, so you don't have a clear definition for those unit boundaries, then you're left trying to figure that out yourself. And unfortunately, if you don't have this clear definition, you don't necessarily know what other boards did prior to you, unless you've adopted some kind of resolution or a maintenance and insurance chart saying, this is how we define the boundaries. But if you don't have that, how do you know if the carpet is your responsibility or the subflooring? Or how do you know where the fireplace falls into that definition of, or that responsibility of? The association is responsible for the common elements and the owner is responsible for the unit. You don't, unless you do some more digging. But that's where you usually start, is just the maintenance section. And then you want to also look at the unit boundaries, because oftentimes the maintenance section dictates responsibilities based on whether something's within the unit boundaries. So look for the unit boundaries, and hopefully they are clear. But if they're not, again, I didn't say this. If unit boundaries or any other terms in the declaration are unclear, the board has the right to adopt a reasonable interpretation of that ambiguous term. So when we get to a couple of the problematic areas in the next slide, I'll show you a little bit more about that. But go to the unit boundaries section and look for whatever those boundaries are. And let's say your unit boundaries aren't that clear. Again, you can adopt the definitions, reasonable definitions of those boundaries. But here's something that a lot of associations don't know, and boards don't know, and managers, is that Kiowa actually provides default unit boundaries if you are a post-Kiowa community. So I said a lot there. Kiowa, for you new managers and board members, Kiowa is the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act, otherwise known as Kiowa, and it's the statute that governs most associations in Colorado. And it's split into, it's a huge statute with many, many pages. So if you have insomnia at all, you can just pull Kiowa off your shelf and start reading it, and you'll fall asleep. But there are some sections that are only applicable, that are applicable to all associations, and those are post-Kiowa associations, those that were created on or after July 1st, 1992. They're subject to all of Kiowa, and they're called post-Kiowa. And then there's pre-Kiowa, which are associations that were created prior to July 1st, 1992. And when I say created, that means the declaration was recorded either before or after that date. So look for the date your declaration, CC&Rs were recorded. If you are a post-Kiowa community, then take this, this number down. This is the statute in the provision in Kiowa that applies and provides default boundaries. It is 38-33.3-202. So that's 38-33.3-202. This is a great provision because it gives you a lot of detail and it defers to your declaration. So I'm just going to read a little bit to you, but it says, except as provided by the declaration. So it defers to your declaration. If walls, floors, or ceilings are designated as the unit boundaries, then here's all the stuff that's considered part of the unit. Lath, furring, wallboard, plasterboard, plaster, paneling, tiles, wallpaper. Here's another thing that it also says what's part considered a limited common element that is allocated to the unit. If you're not sure whether it's a limited common element, it says any shutters, awnings, window boxes, doorsteps, stoops, porches, balconies, and patios, and all exterior doors and windows or other fixtures designed to serve a single unit but located outside the unit boundaries are limited common elements. So this is a great section for you to look at if you're not sure where the unit boundaries are or what's considered a limited common element and your declaration doesn't help you. Look to the Kiowa provision if you are a post-Kiowa community. Unfortunately, it doesn't apply to the pre-Kiowa community, but it does apply to post-Kiowa. And if you don't have Kiowa, get on our website. It's on the very first page, and you could just download it. Okay, so we looked at the unit boundaries. What's next? Review the declaration for common and limited common element definitions. Just be careful not to assume it's the association's responsibility if it says it's a common element, because often there's another section, maybe not right there in the maintenance section, but there might be another section that says limited common elements are the owner's responsibility. And so you need to, and limited common elements are part of the common elements, but they're exclusively used by a unit or less than all units, but not the entire community. So they're usually, balconies, patios, maybe front yards and all that. So, so definitely make sure you're looking at all the sections and don't just jump on something that says association maintains common elements, because again, there's a lot of declarations that say owners are responsible for limited common elements. You might have to review Kiowa, which I just gave you the provision for post-Kiowa communities to give you a little bit more clarification if your declaration doesn't have it. And you might also have to review the map, because what if the declaration or Kiowa doesn't apply, or the declaration tells you a whole lot of nothing? It just says, for example, this is a common one. As owner has the responsibility of maintaining and repairing limited common elements. And then it doesn't tell you what those are. It just says those components that are exclusively used by unit owners. Well, that kind of can mean a lot of things. So if you want more clarity, almost always the condo maps. So get the map that was filed. If you don't have it already, get the map that was filed with the development when it was created, the condo map. And they have unit boundaries, they have designations of what's considered a common element, and it'll say something like LCE is the patio, the balcony, the stairwell. It's a great area. First of all, you should just have the map no matter what, because you might need it for other reasons, not just to find maintenance obligations. So always get your map. But for this type of clarification, if you don't know where the limited common elements are and you're in a condo community and sometimes a townhome community, the map's gonna usually help you. Okay, so some of the problematic areas, sorry, just spit. Pipes and lines. So pipes and lines, which ones? What about the pipes that are inside the walls? What about the pipes that are outside and exclusively serve a particular unit? Be careful to not make assumptions. And like that second or first myth where I said, just because it exclusively serves a unit doesn't mean that that pipe is the unit owner's responsibility. I mean, I've had a lot of the declarations will say pipes are the responsibility of the unit owner at the point that the pipe enters the unit boundaries. That's a very common statement. And then everything outside of those unit boundaries, even if it still serves the unit, is the association's responsibility. It's a very common statement, maintenance statement in declaration. So look for that. And I know it's kind of hard too, because it's hard just reading the declarations, but there's a lot of gobbledygook, and you just got to find those sections. And once you find them, highlight them in your copy, because chances are you're going to be looking at them again and again and again. Even if you have a huge water intrusion case today, it goes away, and you're done. And then next winter or whenever, next freeze, you get another one. And then you're going to forget all of this. So pull out this webinar and pull out your highlighted declaration, and you'll find the way. All right, so pipes and lines are always a problem, and just make sure that you look at the declaration and be careful. How about finished and unfinished surfaces? Here's one of those areas where it says maybe the finished surface of the wall is the owner's responsibility, but it doesn't exactly say, well, where does that finish start? Is it the finished surface of the studs? So is the drywall the unit owner's responsibility, or is it the finished surface of the drywall? So the paint is the owner's responsibility. If it's really not clear, what you can do is you can adopt an interpretation, a reasonable interpretation. And if you do that, try, if you can, to look at historical practice of how you've maintained and repaired in the past, because you want to stick with owners' expectations. If you have 3 units in the past where you've always repaired the drywall, and there might be a good argument that the drywall is the association's responsibility based on the declaration, but it's ambiguous, but there's a good argument. If the last 3 years, 3 units, you've always repaired the drywall, it's going to be difficult to say, oh, we're going to adopt a new interpretation, and now we're going to say we're only responsible for the studs. Even though you might have that argument, when you're looking at expectations and what people are relying on, and political issues, and oh, you're only picking on me, association, that's why you're picking on me, that's why you're treating me differently, that's a problem. So either try to stick, if you can, with historical practice, if there's an actual ongoing regular historical practice to maintain and repair a particular component, or if there isn't, then say, adopt the resolution, which we'll talk about later. But moving forward, if you want to make a particular interpretation stick and say the association will always be responsible from the drywall out, or the studs only out, then you need to amend the declaration to get that interpretation in there. Otherwise, it doesn't stick. There could be future boards that say, we think that interpretation is incorrect, we're going to overturn it, blah, blah, blah. So we'll talk about amendment later on. Basements, that's always an issue too. Is the basement part of the unit? Is it a limited common element? Is it just the finished piece that's the owner's responsibility? Or is it all the basement? Same thing with attics and crawl spaces. Make sure that you review the documents. And if you're not sure, talk to your attorney. Scope of an owner's limited common elements obligations. This is important too, because this just happened actually with one of our associations, where it says the owner's responsible for limited common elements. Okay, great. And it said, here's the balcony, or here's the patio or the walkway. That's a limited common element. If you don't review everything, you might not see what I often see in many declarations, which is, although the owner's responsible for maintaining the limited common element, their role is to actually keep it in good, clean, sanitary, and sightly condition, which is not repair. It's just keeping it looking nice. That's the maintenance limitation. So be careful, because I've seen many declarations say that the owner is responsible for the limited common element to this extent, and then it'll say something like keeping it clean, keeping it sanitary. That does not mean repair. So if it's not clear, you can adopt a maintenance insurance chart, which we'll talk about later, or you can start amending it, if we can talk about later. If you have really old documents and nothing is clear, we definitely want to talk about amending. All right, so now we're at the point where hopefully we've determined the scope of repairs as well as what the declaration says as to who is responsible for making those repairs. So if it just, I would love to say that the analysis just ends here, but it doesn't, because there's two things that could shift that responsibility back to a different party. And those two things are negligence and insurance. So we're going to talk about negligence first. Before we do that, though, what if you don't know where negligence is really important when we're talking about where the leak is coming from and whether the person who was maintaining the component that failed was negligent in doing so. But what if you don't know where the leak is coming from? So you might have this situation where it's coming and somebody sees there's damage in their unit, but they have no idea. It could be from several different units, could be from the common element pipes, who knows? So you're going to have to figure out, where that damage is coming from or where that water is coming from. You might need to get into other units and investigate and punch into walls and do all that stuff just to figure that out. The unit owner might have already done it themselves and could give you a report from their engineer, but really one of the things that we like for you to do is kind of control the situation and have your own vendors come out there, and we'll talk about the water leak policy. But you might have that situation where you have to get into a unit. So how do you get in there? And often you need to look for the easement language that's in the declaration that essentially says we have the right to go into the unit for these purposes. Some of that language is great. Some of the newer documents is very broad, and it's essentially we have the right to go into the unit to perform any obligations we have to perform. Some of them will be very specific and say to inspect for water leaks, which is great if you see that. Some of them will say to perform repairs to the common elements. They're all different, but that's where you're going to look for that easement language to get into the unit. If somebody's saying, no, don't come in my unit, or the tenant's saying, no, you can't come in, then that's what you present them with. We need to get in there to investigate that leak. And so let's say they let you in eventually. If they don't let you in and it's a small leak, it's not like it's flood where you're going to have to go to break into it if they won't let you in, for example, or if nobody's there, you're going to have to go a different route to get in there if it's a flood. But if it's just a leak and somebody won't let you in, that's when you want to get your attorney involved. The attorney can say, look, we need to get in. Here's the language that says we need to get in, and here's the consequences if you don't let us in. And we find out it's actually some coming from your component, and we have to get in some other way to investigate. We're going to hold you responsible for everything and costs and all that. So you just want to make sure you get in there. Hopefully you have the language. But the question sometimes is who has to pay for the investigation? What if you get in there and it says you find out that the actual pipe that's leaking is the owner's pipe and not the association, or you have to punch into the wall and you find out, yes, it's the common element pipe that needs to be repaired, but who pays for the investigation or the cost of damage to the unit in order to investigate? Again, a lot of the declarations might have that language. The newer ones, we always put it in our rewrites, but look for that because sometimes it'll say, the association is responsible for all costs in performing its obligations. So let's say you have to get in there and you investigate and you open up that wall and you find out it's your responsibility. Well, to perform the repair, you as an association had to get in there, had to investigate, had to punch in the wall. So you're responsible for all the costs in the investigation and the repair. So a lot of documents will say that. Some will say we have the right to go in, and if it turns out that the reason for the repair is the owner, so it's their pipe, their line, whatever, then you have the right to charge that back to that owner. Not all of the documents say this, so you need to make sure that you review that carefully, and if you're still not sure, talk to your attorney. There might even be language or no language saying the scope and level of the repair. Some of the documents might say, yes, we have the duty to repair as an association if we had to punch a hole in the wall to fix our pipe, but we only have to repair the drywall. We don't have to repair the paint or the wallpaper or finishing. I mean, that's great because sometimes you can't get the right paint or you have to paint the entire wall, or you have to, you never know whether you're going to be able to restore it to the condition that it was, and then there's always an argument. So to the extent that you can clarify it, if it's not already in your declaration, do so through an amendment. Okay, so look for the chargeback language because it's not always there. So negligence. Does negligence serve to shift repair and costs incurred to another party? And I see all the questions coming, and I'm going to answer them at the end, so don't worry. And again, if I don't get to the questions, all of them today, if there's a lot of them, then I will make sure to print this chat out and respond to the rest and email it out to everybody that's on the class today. All right, so does negligence serve to shift to the other party? So negligence is really, it's just a theory of liability where the owner or the association would be liable because of their failure to act appropriately under the circumstances or reasonably under the circumstances. And this failure then causes harm or injury or damage to another party, who then also suffers damages, things like costs. I had to pay this to repair that component because you were negligent, or I had to stay at the hotel for 3 days because the repair cost because of your negligence. So there are 4 components that you have to satisfy or approve if you are going to show negligence. So if you're saying in this association, yes, we know we have the responsibility of repairing that garage door, but you smashed it. You as an owner smashed it. So you need to fix it. And if there's a challenge, then you as the association or the owner who's trying to prove negligence has the burden of proof of proving negligence. So essentially there's 4 elements. There's duty, breach, cause, and damage. So duty is just, the first step is to determine whether or not the defendant, the person that allegedly was negligent, owed the plaintiff a duty of care or duty of something. And here it's easy. We're talking about maintenance and repair. So the duty would be the association had a duty to properly maintain the roof, or the owner had a duty to maintain their balcony or their water heater, or they had a duty not to, for example, not to let the bathtub overflow. So they had some kind of duty to maintain or duty of care. So the second piece would be breach. Breach is to determine whether or not the owner or the association breached that duty. Would a reasonably prudent party or other person act in the same manner as this potentially negligent person? So if the association knew that there was a hole in the common element roof and failed to timely repair that roof, then they breached their duty because they knew they had to maintain the roof and repair it, and they failed to do so. So that's kind of an easy one. Causation. That is probably one of the more difficult ones. Even if a party failed or breached their duty, was that breach the cause of the damage? So for example, let's say the association has a duty to maintain the siding that's on the building. And let's say they know about it, but they haven't repaired it, or they're in the process of getting bids for repairing the siding. But let's say in this process that we have a 100,000-year flood or something, and all this water comes, and the water comes and it goes into the basement, which happens to have siding on the side. But it goes into the basement for a number of reasons. Maybe it goes through the window well. Maybe it's such a force of nature that the entire building is flooded. Maybe there's all these other reasons why the water got in and it wasn't the siding. So that would fail then on the causation piece. You have to show that the breach actually caused the damage. And then finally, damage, that's the easy piece. That's the part where the injured party has to show that they somehow were damaged by your breach that caused the damage. So if there's costs that they have to pay to repair their carpet, or if they have to again get a hotel room because they have to leave so the maintenance is done and all that, then that's a cost that they're incurring. for your breach, for your negligence. That's damages. Okay, so that's what you have to prove. And you know, the thing is that even if you're able to prove that and say the association thinks your negligence caused us to have to repair the garage door because you smashed into it, you know, you have to be able to prove all that, which probably is easy in that case. In a lot of cases, it's not that easy. Is there chargeback language that allows you to just charge it back? Look for that language. Sometimes it's there, often it's there. Look for the search negligence. If you search negligence, you'll usually find some chargeback language saying, if we have to perform repairs that because of your negligence, then any of our costs incurred are going to be charged back to you. So almost all declarations say something like that, so look for it. Follow any kind of notice and hearing procedures, because sometimes the declaration will say before you charge back any kind of cost, you have to hold a hearing, you have to hear what the owner has to say, and then you make an informed decision of whether or not to charge it back. Even I would also offer a hearing even if that's not required. It's just good to paper trail that you listened and that you gave them the opportunity to discuss why they shouldn't be charged this amount, and you hear it out. You should still give some kind of due process to the owner before you charge anything back to their account, even if the documents don't say that. I would still recommend it. So finally, if the party was negligent, do they make the repairs because they're negligent? You know, that's myth number 3, actually. If a party's negligence caused the damage, the negligent party has to make the repairs. That is a myth, that is a common myth. So just, you know, just because you have a situation where a party is negligent and you can hold them responsible for the negligence, you are still responsible as the party responsible for making the repairs to make those repairs. You still have to make those repairs. You just have to hold them responsible for whatever costs you incurred. That's what you're doing. You're not just saying you're negligent, so I'm stepping out, which I hear a lot. I'm stepping out. Oh, they're negligent. They caused it. So we're just going to get out of this whole situation and tell the owner, go make the repairs, go do it yourself. It's all on you. That's not the case. The association, if they are required to repair that garage door, then the association has to make those repairs and then can hold the owner responsible for those costs. Okay. I want to talk really quickly because I know that there's sometimes the question of, well, do we need to have a negligence standard? We kind of don't like this. We don't like to have to prove negligence. We like to be able to just hold that party responsible. You know, we don't, and tell them it's all if it came from your component, then it's your responsibility, period, end of story. So yes, you can amend the declaration to say that, but we don't recommend it. And I'll tell you a couple reasons why. I mean, first, take it from the association's perspective, and let's say you incorporate that standard and say, if it comes from your component, we don't care whether you're negligent. If it comes from your component that failed in whatever way, whether it's wear and tear or whatever, then you are responsible. So let's say the association is responsible for the roof, and water comes through the roof and causes damage to 3 units. There's no determination of negligence. There's no anything. You're responsible because you wrote into the declaration, you being the association, that they were strictly liable. So that would mean that the association would have to budget for quite a bit, or make sure their insurance policy was pretty hefty to be able to cover all the potential damage that could come from that roof. And here's another issue. What if the owner is in the best position to know whether there's even a roof leak and there's a water mark on the ceiling and the owner doesn't say anything for quite some time, and then finally notifies the association, and now there's mold, there's additional damage. But if the declaration says the association's strictly liable, then the association's strictly liable for all that damage. We're not talking about negligence anymore. So that could be the reason why you don't want to do it. Also, just trying to put the owner in that position. Let's say the owner's water heater. Okay, let's say the owner let the bathtub overflow. You know, that's one thing. That's their clear negligence. They should be responsible for something silly like that. But let's say a water pipe or line just bursts for no reason, it's just wear and tear, no negligence at all, and then it causes damage to the common elements and 3 other units. If you're saying that the owner is strictly liable, they're probably not going to be able to get, they might, but they might not be able to get the type of insurance that would cover all of the potential damage, because there's not really a way to determine what that scope is. I mean, I know some insurance carriers will do that, but it might be very difficult. So we still recommend the negligence standard. Okay, so the other way that you could shift the responsibility for the repair cost to another party is through insurance. So insurance is lovely right now. I know everybody's hating insurance right now because it's so expensive and the market is crazy and carriers are leaving left and right. And I know you're all having to, budget for this and all, but insurance might actually be a way to shift the cost to either the owner or the association. Typically it's used, or it's tried to be used by owners to shift that cost to the association. But before we go into that analysis, just some quick basic insurance property principles. Negligence is really irrelevant, except with respect to figuring out whether you can pass the cost or the deductible back to the negligent party, because negligence doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where it came from or how it happened. What matters is you as an association have a responsibility to insure the damaged property. And so maybe down the line, you might be able to shift the deductible cost back to the negligent party, but it really is irrelevant when you're trying to figure out whether you even need to file a claim. Okay, so that's what we're looking at right now, is whether you need to file a claim. That's your duty. If you're a post-Kiowa condo community, you have to meet minimum insurance requirements, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Also, if you're a post-Kiowa condo community, the association's coverage is always going to have to be primary if there's duplicate coverage, which just means that if both you and the owner have coverage over the same component, then the association's coverage kicks in first. So let's talk about the actual analysis here. Who's responsible for insuring damaged components? Look to the declaration insurance provisions. There's a lot there, but usually in the very beginning, almost always it's in the first or second paragraph under the insurance section. That's where you see the association's responsibilities. So look to that. And it'll say a lot of different things. I can't tell you what the standard thing is, but it'll say a lot of different things. And it often doesn't match the association's maintenance obligations. That's important. It often is more than the association's maintenance obligations. The association might be responsible for maintaining the exterior structure, the studs, and then that's it. But then you look at the insurance, and then all of a sudden it's everything. It's the entire unit except for personal property, carpet, whatever. So just be careful because they don't often overlap. Also, if you are a post-Kiowa community, that condo community, then you have minimum insurance requirements that you have to obtain and meet, regardless of what your declaration says. So this supersedes your declaration. So what do you have to do? You have to insure the units. And that means look at the definition of unit in your declaration to determine what you have to insure. But the statute does say that you don't have to, even if you have to insure the unit, you don't have to insure the finished interior surfaces of walls, floors, or ceilings, or the owner installed improvements or betterments. So those are the exclusions. You can cover them if you want to, and your declaration might require you to cover them, but you don't have to if you're a post-Kiowa condo community. You can exclude these things. So that's essentially original construction. It's the unit plus the fixtures. So the structure of the unit, the fixtures, and the unfinished interior surfaces, walls, floors, and ceilings, and any original construction. So that's what Kiowa says, but again, don't be fooled. Your declaration might require more. Look at the unit boundaries again to figure out what is considered part of the unit, so you can make sure that if you're a post-Kiowa condo community, you are ensuring the unit boundaries. Look at the definition section as well for more clarification if you need to in terms of what your obligations are for insurance. If you're a pre-Kiowa association, you don't have to follow any of Kiowa's minimum obligations. You can have bare walls, for example. So but again, if your declaration requires you to do something more, then follow your declaration. If it's a pre-Kiowa, then you follow your declaration. If it's a post-Kiowa, you have to follow those minimum requirements. So once you determine whether or not you are required to insure the damaged components, so we're looking at, what was damaged, carpet, blah, 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 drywall. That's why you need to know that from question number 1. Is the cost of repairs greater than the deductible amount? If the cost is greater than the deductible amount, then you're probably going to have to file a claim. Or you should be talking to your insurance carrier regardless if it's a condo and there's common elements involved. But if the cost of repairs is less than the deductible, then there's no need to file a claim because there's no insurance proceeds available. The cost is within the deductible amount, which means insurance isn't going to pay anything because the association would typically be responsible for the amount all the way up to that deductible amount. And then the insurance proceeds kicks in. So if the cost of repairs is less than the deductible, no need to file a claim. If the cost of repairs is greater than the deductible, you still need to find out whether there's any exclusions. And I know a manager just wrote to me a little while ago saying, well, that's where the insurance companies are fighting about, what's excluded or whether the loss is actually covered under the policy, and let the insurance companies fight. But you need to know, just because it's greater than the deductible and you're required to insure it, there's a lot of common exclusions under your policy. And they could be mold. Mold is often excluded. Groundwater intrusion is often excluded. So if the cost of repairs is less than the deductible and it's also excluded or it's excluded from the policy, then you are done with respect to insurance. You don't have to file a claim because in the first case, it's less than the deductible. In the second case, you filed a claim, but they have determined that it is excluded from the policy. So you hold on to that determination in case anybody else is trying to say, no, you're responsible because you're primary, or you're responsible because it says you insure the property. Have that determination from your carrier saying, nope, it's excluded, and there's nothing here that requires you to cover mold, for example. What was I going to say there? That was it. So it's look for the exclusions and then use the determination from the insurance carrier, because your duty is to file a claim. That's what I was going to say. Once you've satisfied that duty, then you go with whatever the determination is from the carrier. Who is responsible for loss that falls within the deductible portion? That is something that depends on the documents, the declaration. Sometimes it'll say the association is responsible for all deductibles that would have been covered under association's policy, regardless of whether it's to the unit or the damages to the unit or the common elements. Other declarations will say if the repair is being made to the unit, then the deductible is paid by the owner. Or it'll say if the repair is made to the common elements, then the deductible is allocated to the association, or it's split. Or it might say a negligent party. If the reason why you're filing that claim is because of somebody's negligence, then charge that deductible back to the negligent owner. All of this is document specific. And if your documents don't say anything at all, then you should be adopting an insurance claim submission / allocation of deductible policy to say how the deductible is going to be allocated. So if your declaration is completely silent on that, definitely get that policy in place to say, here's how we're going to allocate the deductible. Okay, so really quickly, I've just got a minute here, and then I'll answer questions. Tips to reduce water intrusion claims. Amendments. If you have the ability to reduce coverage, then amend your documents, amend your declaration to reduce that coverage. A lot of condo association declarations say that the association is responsible for all in, which means everything, the unit, the common elements, and all the upgrades of the owner and in betterments and all of that. Just amend that crap out. Just reduce that coverage to something like original to construction if you're post-Kiowa, because that's the minimum insurance requirements you have to have. If you are a pre-Kiowa community, you can reduce it even further to bare walls. If you are a townhome community, then you could remove insurance altogether potentially, depending on how your townhomes are constructed and they're not stacked. So there's abilities to reduce the coverage, but you're probably going to have to amend the declaration to do that. Address the problematic provisions in your declarations. The thing I can think of is removing the requirement that requires the association to allocate all the deductibles to the association. Instead, what I find works is better is unit owner has the deductible for their unit, association has the deductible for common elements, negligence shifts the deductible to the negligent party. Maybe, reduce the scope of any of your maintenance and repair responsibilities. If you have something that says the association is responsible for all this interior stuff, then amend to get rid of that. Maybe you should add, this is a popular one, add a provision saying that the owner is required to keep the temperature at a certain degree so that the pipes don't freeze. And if they don't maintain it for that degree during, winter months or whatever, then that's negligence and they can hold that homeowner responsible for everything. Remove the deductible cap. That's for this one. Sometimes there's a cap that says you can't have a deductible over $5,000 or $10,000 or something. Well, that doesn't really help you because you want to actually, another thing you can do to reduce water intrusion claims is to increase the deductible amount to the amount that is over the typical water intrusion claim. Because remember earlier when we talked about, is the cost of repairs greater than the deductible? If your deductible is $50,000, the cost of repairs might be $25,000. Maybe that's the average. And if that's the case, then there's no need to file a claim. So you're reducing the amount of claims you have to file if you can increase that deductible amount over the average water intrusion and save those deductibles in that policy for the real catastrophic situations where the entire building goes down. Okay, tips to make the process easier, amendments, easement for inspection. Make sure you have that inspection language in there saying we get the right to go into the unit to inspect for water intrusions. Make sure you have that water, the chargeback language saying if we find out that it's your unit component that failed, then we can charge you back the costs of investigation, repair, everything. Also, it's not up there, but I put better define the boundaries. Makes it easier if you know exactly where that wall stops, or better define the maintenance obligations. Shift responsibilities, again, reduce the coverage. Adopt a water leak policy. I really quickly want to talk about that because that's that helps so much. A water leak policy is a policy that tells you step by step what you're supposed to do if you see water coming into your unit. Tells you, who to call right away. Follow it up 24 hours with an email. Who gets to contact the vendors to investigate it? What kind of information are you supposed to provide to the management company? So much of this stuff is such a struggle for the management company to get that they can never get through that process quickly because of this lack of step-by-step process. So that's really important. Adopt an insurance claim, submission, allocation of deductible policy. That really, really helps when it comes to filing a claim because we've seen you're trying to determine whether or not the association's insurance is responsible for this or not. But then you have a homeowner that might try to file a claim directly with the carrier, because the association's carrier, because they are an additional insured under the policy. And so they try to do that and they call the carrier and the carrier is going to say, okay, well, you are an additional insured, so we probably have to open and file this claim for you. If you have this insurance claim submission policy, this is allowed per statute, then that policy will, again, give you the step-by-step process that both the owner and the association have to follow in terms of determining whether to file a claim and the timeframes within which the association's insurance carrier has to get back to the association so they can get back to the owner. And so if the owner tries to file that claim right away, your carrier will have this policy and it will say, nope, I have to allow the association to adjust this and make a determination first. And so it, again, gives you the control that you need to get. Also, the allocation of deductible policy. Well, one thing also too, a lot of HO6 carriers, they're the owner's insurance representative. As soon as they see it's a condo association, they go, oh, condos are primary insurance. We're not going to do anything. And they immediately direct it to the condo association. If you have this policy in place, you can immediately send that policy back and say, nope, here's why it's not an association issue. Because again, it lays it all out along with the water leak policy. It also allocates the deductible, so that always makes it clear when you are trying to figure out who actually is responsible for the costs if there's no insurance proceeds. Who's responsible for that loss within the amount of the deductible if there's no insurance? Typically, it just goes back to the person who's responsible for maintaining and repairing the component. Goes back to question number 2. And if that's the case, you put that in your allocation of deductible policy, which again makes it very clear for both the owners, the board, and just everybody in general, the insurance people, so they know how to allocate the claim or how to address it. Okay, real quick. Oops. We talked about adopt a maintenance insurance chart. That's a chart, I'm sure you've heard of it, where we clarify all the maintenance components. It's a nice user-friendly chart. It says A for association, O for owner. And the great thing about that chart is you can just give it to your carrier and say, insure everything that says A for association. Or the owner can give it to their carrier and say, insure everything that says O. It's just a great user-friendly, easy way to determine and know how to budget for your responsibilities without having to kind of go through and seek it out in these old documents. Okay, best practices. Sorry, I'm over here. If in doubt, make the repair and figure out who's obligated to pay later. We always say just get it done. Just make the repairs, because the damage, if it's really ambiguous, who's responsible for that repair, and it's a condo, just get it done and then figure it out, and then charge back the owner if it turns out to be the owner's responsibility. Follow, obviously, your water leak and claim submission if you have one. Respond to information requests quickly. Give the information quickly. Try to make sure that the owners and everybody's responding quickly, because that it could just totally, what's the word? It's exacerbated if you don't keep it on a nice timeline. And people get upset on both sides if you're not responding quickly. So just do that. And then call your attorney if you're insurer. All right, 7 minutes over, sorry. Let's look at some questions. And let me try to get up here to the very top. Okay, hi. Some of the hesitation on owners and board members' minds is, if we have to start cutting holes in walls and ceilings to look for a source of the leak, who has the responsibility for repairing those holes? We talked about that. And it's going to depend on your documents. And so many of the documents say that the association is responsible for any costs incurred in performing its obligations. And so if you cut into a hole into a wall, and then you find out that the common element pipe has to be repaired, then I would argue everything up until repairing, including repairing that pipe, is the association's cost, because it was all the costs incurred and all the action taken in order to perform the obligation of repairing your common element pipe. But if it says nothing, or if it says you're only responsible for repairing the pipe, but it doesn't say anything about the investigation costs, I would still fall back on that until you amend your documents otherwise, because it just makes sense to make the association responsible for any costs incurred in performing its obligations. Same thing as the other way around. I would fall back on, if it's the owner's responsibility, it's their repair, their leak, whatever, then hopefully you have the language that says any costs incurred that benefit an owner or that are related to that unit can be charged back to the owner. Let's hope you have that language. If you don't, you really need to start amending. Most new documents have that language. If you don't, you can still make that argument. It's just not as solidly supported. Make sure if you're going to amend too, that you make sure if you're going to amend that you not only talk about who has that responsibility for the investigation costs and repair costs of the wall, but also the extent of the repair. So again, if the association is going to restore that wall at the association's cost, you should specify whether that means as close to the original condition as possible, or only the structure, or only the drywall, or only paint ready. That kind of level of detail really solves so many of the problems. Can you repeat where to find that? I think that was at 1227. I think that might have been the Kiowa provision for the unit boundaries. That Kiowa provision, get on our website, front page, you can download Kiowa, and the provision in question that defines unit boundaries, it gives default language if the declaration is silent, and if this is a post-Kiowa community, is 38-33.3-202. Sorry, I didn't put that in the presentation. I should have done that. Does the Kiowa provision mention foundations in that provision? It doesn't. It doesn't mention that. But it typically, the foundations would be under the portion that it does define. So even though it doesn't, I don't think it says foundation, but it does say that the unit starts at, for example, drywall. So it would be on the bottom, it would probably, the foundation would be the association's responsibility, because that's typically underneath that topped finished surface. So where can I research to get a condo map? This is for a pre-Kiowa property. The condo map is actually in the clerk and recorder's office of the county in which the community is located. So if you're not, you just have to, you can do this online. Most of them now allow you to do this online, and then you can search and then pay something and they'll get it for you. If we're your counsel, we probably already have it in our files. So contact us and we might be able to get you the map. If we don't have it in our files, we could easily, we've got accounts with all the clerk and recorders, we can get it for you. What if an owner or previous owner modifies their plumbing, which may make susceptible to maybe damage? That's, if there's prior modifications, you probably could argue potentially negligence, depending on those prior modifications and whether the association approved it or didn't approve it. That's why it's so important to make sure that it's clear to all homeowners, especially in condo associations, that absolutely no modifications to common element plumbing, even if it's within their boundaries, anything that affects the structural integrity of the building or the common utility system cannot be modified or changed or rerouted without association approval, because then you can have your contractor review it or do it. But if the owner did it and your contractor comes in and says, you know what, they didn't do this correctly, then you could probably use that as a basis for negligence if you're trying to hold that owner responsible for the additional costs that you're going to now have to incur because it was to common element property. I assume this is much less complicated in a townhome community. Yes, when the declarations require walls and coverage, seems we are responsible for everything. Yeah, I mean, the townhome community, many of them don't have any insurance responsibilities on the interior. They just have the structure, the exterior structure. So it's usually pretty easy for a townhome. Now, difference between townhome and a condo is a townhome, the owner owns everything. They own the entire unit. They own the roof, the walls, the ground underneath them, the foundation. They own everything. But with a townhome association, typically the association is responsible for maintaining the exterior of the townhome. So I'm not saying that's what it says, but most declarations say that. With a condo association, the owner owns typically the airspace within the perimeter boundaries, the perimeter wall, floors, and ceilings, and everything else, the common element walls, common element pipes, outside grounds, everything is owned by everyone together, all the owners together. That's the difference, is all the owners own the common elements jointly. That's the difference between a condo and a townhome is, townhome, association maintains the exterior, but doesn't own it. And the association often owns the ground, the grassy space. So yeah, with townhomes, typically it's not this difficult. But if you have a declaration, a townhome declaration that requires the association to insure all in, or original to construction, you can definitely reduce that to bare walls if you wanted to. So I say freezing or is installed improperly. So I'm not sure where, I'm sorry, I'm not sure where that, oh, okay. What if an owner or previous owner modifies their plumbing, which makes it susceptible to freezing or is installed improperly? Again, it's a way to potentially hold that owner negligent for not only the damage it causes, but also for potentially your need to replace it with something that doesn't freeze improperly or whatever. What about a major asbestos spill due to a leaking sewer pipe? Would that fall under the the homeowner or the association? I hate to say this, but a lot of this is going to depend on the documents as well as the actions in spilling that asbestos. Oh, well, it says due to a leaking sewer pipe. Okay. So if it's no negligence by either party and it's just because the leaking sewer pipe was leaking and then it happened, there's no negligence. You fall back on the other analysis. You know, what was damaged, who is responsible for repairing that damage. If there's no negligence, then does the association's insurance require the association to insure the property that was damaged by the asbestos? So you still have to go through that analysis. And let's say the association is not responsible for maintaining and repairing the carpet that was damaged by the asbestos. Let's say the association was not negligent in causing the asbestos spill. Let's say the association has zero insurance obligations over that carpet. Well, if that's the case, then no responsibility at all by the association. It falls on the owner. So you have to go through the entire process before you get to the answer. Scenario: association insures drywall and has a deductible of $25,000. Owners have repair obligation of drywall. Unit B leaks into A below and damages drywall in A. No negligence proven. Repairing the drywall costs $5,000. Is it true that the HOA pays for that drywall? No. So here it says the HOA is supposed to insure the drywall, right? But the owners are supposed to repair the drywall. So if the association has to insure the drywall, one of the first questions you ask is, are the repair costs less than the deductible on the association's insurance policy? Your scenario says the deductible is $25,000, but the cost to repair is $5,000. If it's less than the deductible, then there's no duty to repair that drywall. It falls on the owner who is responsible for the repairing the drywall. The only exception, I'm going to say where it might shift to the association anyway, is if the language somehow says that the association is responsible for all repairs, even if they fall within the deductible, if it would have been covered under the policy if the repairs were over the deductible. I know that's a lot, but I mean, sometimes I see language that holds the association responsible for all loss that falls within the deductible. So if this was a claim, a loss that would have been covered under the association's policy, and if the declaration says the association is responsible for all loss within the deductible amount, and it's not excluded, whatever that loss is, then in that narrow scenario, the association might be responsible. If the association is responsible for repair, like fire sprinkler, but it's only one building, can it be charged back to the building instead of sharing it as an association? That's a great question. So if the association is responsible for the fire sprinkler and it only affects one building and there's 6 buildings, this is all document specific, and not just document specific with your declaration, but also document specific in terms of your policy. Because I don't know what your policy says, because there might be a way to file a claim that's only related to one building. I mean, there's so many potentials with the policy, but let's say your policy is clear and it says, it's covered under one claim, and now you have this $10,000 deductible. or whatever it is, and you want to spread it around across the entire project or just that building, look to your declaration to see if it says that the deductible can be allocated to the building that needs the repair. So that's the kind of level of detail that you might find in your declaration that allows you to shift the entire deductible to one building because that's the only one that's benefiting from the repairs. Or conversely, it might require you to allocate the deductible against every single unit in the community, but it's document specific, unfortunately. Can a resolution, when CC&Rs are old, just so to let you know, I'm going to go till 1:30. And then if whatever I don't answer by 1:30, I will print and email you the answers. When CC&Rs are old and long outdated, like a lot of CC&Rs, it is more efficient and clear to update the entire CC&Rs consistent with new regulations rather than a series of numerous amendments. Do you agree with this approach? Absolutely, 100%. I teach amendments all the time. I have a webinar that discusses this. First of all, it's probably a lot cheaper to just rewrite a really poorly written governing document set than it is to piecemeal the amendments over time. Because every time you piecemeal, it costs a lot just to prepare that one single amendment. And then the more you add to it, it's just really expensive. Second, if it's the declaration, I wouldn't want you to go through the trouble of having to get all the owners to approve, and usually it's 67% to approve one amendment, because then you have to keep going back to the owners. Can you approve this one too? Can you approve this one too? And, there's a lot of apathy in the communities, and it's going to be really difficult. It's so much better. What's really good with respect to this kind of amendment is that M&I chart, that maintenance and insurance chart, because you have a chart that you just attach as an exhibit to your rewritten declaration. And there's no more provisions in the declaration itself that are confusing and, in all different places. Instead, it just says maintenance and repair responsibilities are on the chart in exhibit A, or whatever the exhibit is. And then you have this chart, this lovely chart that you can just circulate and say, okay, now you're on notice, owners. Now you're on notice, association. This is what you're responsible for maintaining. This is what you're responsible for ensuring. Go forth and budget and get the right documents in place. Can a resolution be adopted by the board if you do not have language about investigation of damages, or does it have to be an amendment? So you can certainly adopt a resolution to clarify it. If there's any language in there that you can say, this is ambiguous, I need to clarify and clarify the process. And you could probably find some language, general language, saying something like the board has the right to adopt rules and regulations regulating the community, regulating the maintenance. So you'll probably find some general language that allows you to do that. And that's that resolution about investigating the unit and charging the cost back and all that. The thing is, again, if you don't have it clearly stated in the declaration, it's subject to challenge. Somebody might challenge and say, wait, hold on a second. The last 10 years, you have never charged those costs back to the owner. Why are you doing it for me? And so you can say, well, we just adopted the resolution from here on forward. That's why we're doing it. But it just makes it messy. The second piece too is realistically, future boards can interpret things differently, and usually maybe that doesn't happen quite as much, but they can argue that interpretation is wrong, and so we are adopting a new interpretation, and here's what it is. So it doesn't give you any certainty. That's why I would rather you amend the declaration to put this language. I think a group of board politicians got together, yes, and wrote the original docs for all communities and made them as vague and lacking as humanly possible. I agree with you. That's just a statement here, no question. I 100% agree. How can you prove negligence? Sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it's like, the water was overflowing or you were smoking in bed and, whatever. Use your contractors. First of all, talk to your attorney. The attorney should be able to tell you right away. If you give them some facts, they're going to say, nah, that's not negligence. They might tell you immediately that is not negligence. If it's unclear and it takes a lot of fact finding and reporting and an engineer reviewing and all that, get your contractor in place and your engineer to review it and give you a report and say, we feel that this came from this pipe and that pipe was not maintained appropriately, or it was defectively installed, or whatever establishes that negligence, because that gives you the ability to rely on that expert opinion. So you can make an informed decision and say, we decided to charge the owner back for this cost because they were negligent. Here's our expert report saying so. And then if the owner challenges and goes to court, even if a judge says you're wrong, they weren't negligent, the judge is not going to hold you individually responsible, the board member, because you made an informed decision based on an expert's opinion. So you're really trying to paper trail this. Use an outside party if you can. How do I go about obtaining a copy of the plat map? We talked about that. It's in the clerk and recorder's office. If you're one of our clients, call us and we'll get it for you. What do you do when a homeowner in a townhouse reports water coming in from the foundation? The foundation is the homeowner's responsibility to maintain and insure. The owner is convinced it is caused by drainage outside the lot. What should the association be doing at this point? There's so much. So the townhouse, you're right. Remember, the townhouse is different. Townhome is different from a condo, because the townhome, the entire property is owned by the owner. And 99% of the time, it says the owner is responsible for foundation, as well as any of the land underneath that foundation. However, sometimes the declarations will require the association to be responsible for that land that's outside of the townhome. And maybe there's drainage issues or whatever. And so this person is saying, even though this person is saying that there's water coming in through the foundation and the foundation is their responsibility, they're saying the association should be repairing the foundation because the water is draining from outside the lot, from an area that's under the association's responsibility. So here's a scenario. Here's one of those myths. The owner is saying, just because it came from your component association, you're responsible for the repair. And that is just not the case. You have to determine whether or not, first of all, is it really coming from your common area portion or any component that you're responsible for, like drainage from the common elements. First of all, find that out. Is it actually your component that is causing the water to intrude into the basement? Use an expert, use an engineer, use a landscaper to report that. Second, if it is your responsibility, were you negligent? Did you fail to do whatever you needed to do, and your failure caused the water to intrude into this person's basement or cause the foundation repairs? Probably not, if it just happened and you just found out about it. But let's say you have 10 years of ignoring it. Everybody's been saying, you need to fix the drainage because it's coming into our basement. And then you say, okay, we'll defer it. And then 10 years later, you have 10 homeowners saying the same thing. That's negligence, because you knew about it and failed to timely repair it. But outside of the negligence piece, there's probably zero insurance responsibilities that'll cover the foundation or the interior of that unit, because it's a townhome property. And oftentimes the association has zero insurance responsibility. So in that case, I would just be asking an expert to figure out where that water is coming from, your expert. And then if it's from your area, fix whatever that issue is. If it's not from your area, tell the owner, here's what our expert says. And if they say, well, it came from your area, and so fix my foundation, say, no, there was no negligence, if in fact there was no negligence. Hot water tank burst simply due to old age. Oh, no, we have 2 minutes. Hot water tank burst simply due to old age. This is a negligence question. Owner had no idea it was becoming an issue. Is that negligence? Similar for toilet wax rings. Sometimes they just fail over time. I would say that if it's a wear and tear issue, probably not negligence. However, we have had a lot of associations that have us rewrite their declarations and put in language saying, this is considered negligence. If you fail to maintain and inspect whatever the component is on this basis, and if you would have inspected on this basis, you would have discovered this, then you're negligent. So I would say just old age, no, probably not negligence. If it's something that they could determine and they should have, like, for example, if they should have cleaned their chimney every 2 years or whatever the standard in the industry is. You can establish maintenance standards, such as keeping the degree on a certain level so the pipes don't burst. You can do the same thing with other components that are high risk components, and establish what that maintenance standard is, how often they have to inspect it, how often they should be replacing it. And then if you can claim that they're well outside of that standard, you could probably argue negligence. I don't know if it's worth it, but that's certainly something you can do. Okay, it's 1:30. I know we have some more questions, and I apologize, but poor Jess is probably saying, I want to go to lunch, and she's still talking. So I think I'm going to be able to print out the rest of these questions and get that to you, the answers to anybody who's still on the webinar. Also, just so you know, this class and this webinar, we have a lot of things that we talk about, and we don't go into detail, like the water leak policy and it's a lot of stuff to unpack. I'm going to send you information. It's either going to come from Jessa or from myself or from Summer, but we will send you, number one, an article that I wrote that kind of goes into this entire analysis, but then you have it in article form. Also informational sheets on the water leak policies, the M&I charts, those kinds of things, the insurance claim submission and allocation of deductible, just so you have a little bit more information on each of those steps. And if you are interested in having us draft any of them, you can always contact us and we can do so. Also, what we're doing as well is we're trying to help our clients and our managers do some onboard training. And even though we have these webinars that we provide every month, many associations are asking us to do on-site training for particular issues. So this could be one issue. If you're interested, contact us. We have a lot of requests for proper enforcement steps. So just give us a call. That is it. Thank you so much for those who stayed. I don't know how many stayed, but thank you so much. And we'll see you later, and I will get you this information. Thanks.